Dallas, Texas. Would you save someone who wouldn't even look at you? Dallas, Texas. A city of contrast, wealth and struggle side by side, yet worlds apart. In one of its poorest neighborhoods, 13-year-old Malik Johnson knew survival better than most. He had been raised by his grandmother, a woman who worked tirelessly to keep a roof over their heads. Life had never been easy, but Malik had learned to make the most of what little he had. After school, he spent his afternoons at Mr. Carter's mechanic shop, sweeping floors, running errands, and fixing old engines. It was more than just a job. It was a glimpse of the future he dreamed of, a future where he could build something better for himself and his grandmother. But dreams felt distant when reality was so harsh. Meanwhile, across town, billionaire tycoon Richard Davenport sat in his glass-walled office, watching the Dallas skyline stretch endlessly before him. He had built an empire from nothing, turning risks into wealth. To the world, he was a self-made man, a symbol of success. But in his mansion, his daughter, Emily, saw another side of him, a man too busy chasing power to notice the distance growing between them. Emily had everything money could buy: expensive clothes, a private driver, invitations to elite parties. But what she lacked was something she never admitted: respect for those outside her world. People like Malik? They did not exist in her reality. They were background noise, faces she passed without a second glance. Fate, however, had other plans. One ordinary afternoon, while Malik tightened bolts in the repair shop, Emily sat in the back of her father's luxury car, scrolling through her phone. She barely noticed when the car turned down a side street, until the driver muttered something under his breath. Traffic had slowed. A commotion ahead. A group of people crowded around an intersection, voices raised, energy tense, and then screams. Malik looked up from under the hood of a car, wiping sweat from his forehead. Outside, just beyond the shop's entrance, something was happening. He stepped out, curiosity turning into something colder when he saw the panic in people's faces. A man staggered back, clutching his chest. Someone had a gun. Emily's driver cursed, reaching for the locks. "Stay down, Miss Davenport." But Emily did not move. Her heart pounded as she turned her gaze toward the crowd. In that moment, her world, so polished, so protected, collided with Malik's. And then it happened, the moment that changed everything. Malik did not hesitate. Emily did not see it coming. And the city of Dallas would never forget what came next. "Where are you watching from? And what time is it?" The air was crisp as Emily Davenport stepped away from her nanny's watchful eyes, her expensive sneakers crunching against the fallen leaves. A family trip to the countryside had been her father's idea, not for bonding, but to project the image of a man who still valued time away from the corporate world. Emily had grown bored within minutes. As the adults talked near their luxury SUV, she wandered toward the woods, craving just a moment of solitude. The world felt quieter here, the towering trees blocking out the sight of endless expectations. But what she didn't realize was that she wasn't alone. For weeks, a group of masked men had been watching the Davenport family, studying them, waiting for the perfect moment, and now it had arrived. Emily barely had time to turn when hands grabbed her from behind. A rough cloth muffled her scream as she kicked and struggled, her heart slamming against her ribs. The kidnappers worked fast, dragging her through the trees toward a black van parked just beyond sight. They had one goal: ransom. Millions in exchange for the billionaire's daughter. A perfect plan. Clean, fast, no mistakes. Except for one. They didn't see Malik. Across the street, Malik Johnson had been finishing up a delivery for Mr. Carter's repair shop when he caught the movement in the trees. He saw the flash of Emily's white sweater, the struggle, the van door sliding open. His stomach dropped. He could have walked away. No one would have blamed him. The world Emily came from had never made room for kids like him. And yet, something inside him refused to let this happen. His feet moved before his mind could catch up. He ran toward danger, toward the girl who wouldn't have looked twice at him just days ago. Because right now, it wasn't about where they came from. It was about what was right. Malik's heart pounded as he ducked behind a parked truck, eyes locked on the van. The kidnappers worked quickly, shoving Emily inside. One of them pulled out his phone, likely sending a message to someone waiting on the other end. Time was running out. Emily kicked wildly, her muffled screams breaking through the thin walls of the vehicle. The driver slammed the door shut, sealing her fate. The van's engine roared to life, tires spitting dirt as they prepared to disappear into the night. Malik's mind raced. He had no phone, no weapon, no backup. But he had one thing the kidnappers didn't expect, his instincts. He could have walked away. Instead, he ran toward danger. Malik crouched behind the trees, his breath coming in quick bursts. He had been following the van for miles, keeping a safe distance, while his mind worked through possible ways to help Emily. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. The kidnappers had driven deep into the forest, where no one would hear a scream. Finally, the vehicle came to a stop near a run-down cabin. Its windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling off in jagged strips. It looked abandoned, but Malik knew this place had been chosen for a reason. Secluded, hidden, perfect for a crime no one was meant to witness. He crept closer, careful not to snap any twigs beneath his sneakers. Inside the cabin, voices rose. "Call her father. Tell him we want 10 million," one man growled. Emily sat on the cold wooden floor, hands tied, tears streaming down her face. She didn't bother struggling. There was no one here to help her. No one but herself. Malik pressed himself against the outside wall, his mind racing. He had to act fast. There was no time to wait for help. He scanned the area, his eyes landing on a pile of rocks just a few feet away. Slowly, he picked up one and threw it toward the opposite side of the camp. The noise echoed through the trees. Instantly, one of the men tensed. "What was that?" he muttered. "Probably an animal," another said. "Go check it out." That was all Malik needed. As soon as the man disappeared into the woods, he slipped inside. Emily flinched when she saw him, her tear-filled eyes widening in shock. "Emily," he whispered, "we have to go." She hesitated. She barely knew him. Could she trust him? But before she could decide, they heard the heavy footsteps of the kidnapper returning. Malik grabbed a sharp rock from the floor and frantically sawed through the rope binding her wrists. Every second felt like a lifetime. Finally, the last fiber snapped. He grabbed her hand and yanked her up. "Run!" he shouted. Emily didn't think. She ran. They burst through the door and sprinted into the dense forest. The trees became a blur as they pushed forward, branches scratching their faces and arms. Malik's lungs burned, but he didn't stop. "Hey, they're getting away!" a voice roared behind them. Gunfire rang out, the sharp crack splitting the air. A bullet whizzed past Malik's ear, embedding itself into a tree trunk. "Faster!" he urged Emily, pulling her along. They couldn't afford to slow down. But the kidnappers weren't far behind. Malik's mind raced. He needed a plan, fast. The terrain was uneven, the ground damp from the morning rain. That's when he saw it. a narrow creek just ahead. "Jump in!" he shouted. Emily hesitated for only a second before leaping into the water. Malik followed, the freezing cold shocking his system. The current was strong, dragging them downstream, but it was better than being caught. Behind them, the kidnappers skidded to a stop at the edge of the creek, cursing. "Find them! They won't get far." But Malik and Emily let the water carry them away, disappearing into the night, their escape only just beginning. The forest echoed with the sound of heavy boots pounding against the earth. The kidnappers had discovered Emily's escape, and now they were hunting her and Malik through the darkness. "Find them!" one of the men bellowed, his voice slicing through the trees like a knife. Malik's breath was ragged as he led Emily through the dense woods, his heart hammering in his chest. They couldn't stop, couldn't slow down. Every second mattered. "I see them!" a kidnapper yelled, and before Malik could react, bang! A gunshot cracked through the night. Bark exploded from a tree inches from them, splinters flying. Emily yelped, stumbling. Malik grabbed her hand, yanking her forward. "Keep going," he urged. Branches whipped at their faces as they ran, their feet slipping over damp leaves and uneven ground. Malik could hear the kidnappers crashing through the underbrush behind them, their curses growing louder. He had to think, fast. Up ahead, the ground sloped downward. A steep hill, too steep to run down without tumbling. Malik didn't hesitate. He grabbed onto a thick branch hanging over the incline. "Hold on," he shouted. Emily barely had time to process what was happening before Malik swung them both down the hill, their bodies sliding through the dirt and leaves. They hit the ground hard at the bottom, rolling to a stop. Malik groaned, pain jolting through his ribs. Emily gasped beside him, her hands scraped and bloody, but they were still alive. Above them, the kidnappers reached the edge of the hill and skidded to a stop. "We can't go down there. It's too steep," one of them muttered. "They won't get far," another growled. "Spread out. Cut them off before they reach the road." Malik's pulse pounded. They weren't safe yet. He pulled Emily to her feet. "We have to move." They stumbled forward, exhaustion dragging at their limbs, but there was no choice. The kidnappers weren't giving up. Then, through the trees, light. Malik's heart leapt. A house, a car? Anything would be better than this nightmare. They ran toward it, hope surging through them. The light flickered through the trees, growing brighter. As they neared, Malik realized it wasn't just any house. It was a mansion, massive, with iron gates stretching high above their heads. He recognized it immediately. It had to be one of Davenport's properties. Emily's father's money had finally worked in their favor. Emily gasped, "We need to get inside." Malik scanned the property. There was a guard post near the gate, but no one was inside. The front door was too far. They had to find another way in. Behind them, the kidnappers were still in pursuit. Their voices carried through the trees. "We don't have time," Malik muttered. His eyes darted toward a side entrance, a service gate barely visible in the shadows. He ran toward it, Emily close behind. Malik pressed against the metal bars, locked. "Help!" Emily called toward the house. "Somebody, please!" Malik yanked at the gate again, but it wouldn't budge. Footsteps pounded closer. The kidnappers were near. Then a voice. "Hey, who's out there?" A security guard stepped out onto the front steps, flashlight beaming into the darkness. His eyes widened at the sight of Emily. "Miss Davenport?" "Help us," she cried. "They're coming." The guard sprang into action, pulling a radio from his belt. Behind them, the kidnappers skidded to a halt, realizing they were now in the open. A siren blared from the estate, flooding the trees with red and blue lights. Malik and Emily turned, breathless, as the kidnappers froze. They had made it. But was it truly over? Malik and Emily burst through the estate's front gate, gasping for breath. Their bodies ached from the chase. But they didn't stop moving until they were safely inside. The mansion loomed before them, its grand entrance glowing under golden lights. Before Malik could even process the relief, security guards swarmed them. Flashlights and guns aimed directly at him. "Don't shoot!" Emily screamed, throwing herself in front of Malik. "He saved me." The guards hesitated, but didn't lower their weapons. The scene was chaos, sirens blaring in the distance, the kidnappers being apprehended outside the gates, and Emily trying to catch her breath. Just then, the massive front doors of the estate swung open. Richard Davenport stormed outside, his face twisted with panic. "Emily!" His voice was sharp with desperation. She barely had time to react before he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. His relief was evident, his grip firm as if he feared she would disappear again. But even in his moment of joy, his eyes barely flicked toward Malik. "Who is this?" Richard asked, his tone colder than the night air. Emily pulled away from his embrace. "He's the reason I'm alive," she said, her voice soft but steady. Richard's gaze fell on Malik. His expression hardened, scanning the boy's torn clothes, scratched-up arms, and dirt-streaked face. "What do you want, kid? Money?" he asked, his voice sharp and direct. Malik stood tall despite the exhaustion weighing on his body. "I just wanted to help." Emily frowned, something in her expression shifting. "He risked his life for me. You should be thanking him." Richard pursed his lips, still eyeing Malik with suspicion. A long silence stretched between them. And then something unexpected happened. One of the guards stepped forward. "Sir, the police want to speak with you." Richard nodded, but his eyes never left Malik. There was something calculating in his gaze, as if he was trying to understand why a boy like Malik would go to such lengths for his daughter. Finally, he extended his hand. "You should come inside," he said. "We need to talk." Malik hesitated, unsure of what to expect. Emily gave him a small nod. "You deserve to be heard." And for the first time that night, Malik felt like he wasn't just an outsider in their world. He had changed something. But what came next would change everything. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the Davenport estate as Malik stood at the towering iron gates once more. Only this time, he wasn't running for his life. He was being invited in. The call had come earlier that day. Richard Davenport wanted to see him. Malik had hesitated, unsure of what to expect, but his grandmother had encouraged him to go. Now, as the gates opened and he stepped inside, he couldn't shake the surreal feeling in his chest. He had never imagined setting foot on the property under these circumstances. The sprawling mansion loomed ahead, its perfectly manicured lawn and towering pillars a symbol of a world so different from his own. Richard met him at the door, his expression unreadable. He studied Malik for a long moment before finally speaking. "I misjudged you," he admitted, his voice quieter than before. Malik shifted on his feet, unsure how to respond. The man standing before him was no longer just the cold, distant billionaire from the news. There was something different in his eyes, something almost human. Emily grinned beside her father. "I told him you were special," she said, nudging Malik playfully. Richard exhaled sharply, as if coming to terms with something he hadn't wanted to accept. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. "This," he said, handing it to Malik, is a full scholarship to the best private school in the state, and inside is a trust fund for your college education." Malik's hands trembled as he took the envelope. His mind spun, trying to process what was happening. He had spent his whole life thinking people like Richard Davenport never noticed kids like him, and now here he was, offering something beyond his wildest dreams. I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Say you'll take it," Emily said, smiling. "You deserve it." Malik looked up at Richard, searching for any sign of hesitation, but there was none. The billionaire wasn't just offering money. He was offering opportunity, a chance to rewrite the future Malik had once thought was set in stone. Malik turned to his grandmother, who stood nearby, her eyes glistening with tears. She nodded, her lips curving into a proud smile. He thought of all the nights she had sacrificed, the lessons she had taught him about resilience and kindness, even when the world seemed cruel. "Okay," Malik whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll take it." Richard extended a hand. Malik hesitated for only a second before shaking it. The handshake felt heavy, filled with unspoken words and new beginnings. As he left the estate later that afternoon, the envelope still clutched tightly in his hands, Malik felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. He had saved a life, and in return, his own life had changed forever. He glanced at Emily one last time before stepping through the gates. She gave him a small, knowing smile. "See you at school," she said. For the first time, Malik believed her, because now the future was his to shape. A hero deserves more than just a thank you. Days later, Malik walked into his new school, wearing his first-ever uniform. The fabric felt stiff against his skin, but the pride he felt wearing it made every uncomfortable inch worth it. For the first time in his life, he was not just another kid on the street. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't overlooked. He was someone who mattered. Malik had never imagined this day would come, let alone so soon. His world had always been about surviving, about getting by day, with no one ever offering a hand. But now, things had changed. Thanks to Emily and the kindness of others, Malik had a future. He was no longer just a boy with nothing. He was a student with potential. He was someone who had been given a second chance to rewrite his story. He still worked at the mechanic shop after school. He hadn't forgotten where he came from, and he never would. His grandmother had taught him the value of hard work, of never forgetting your roots. That's why, even though his life had changed dramatically, he knew better than to take it all for granted. The work ethic that had kept him going through the toughest times was still with him, and it always would be. Emily, too, had played an unexpected role in this transformation. She had been his rock when everything seemed impossible. They had become unlikely friends, two people from completely different worlds who had crossed paths, and in doing so, changed each other's lives forever. Emily's belief in him had given Malik the courage to keep going, to keep dreaming of a future beyond the streets. "You'll do great things, Malik," his grandmother told him one evening, after she had seen how far he had come. Her eyes shone with pride, her voice full of hope. She had never doubted him, but now there was a quiet certainty in her tone. The boy, who had been told he wouldn't amount to anything, had proven them all wrong. Malik smiled, his eyes warm with gratitude. "I already have," he said quietly. It wasn't just about getting into a good school or finding a place to stay. It was about how far he had come from the boy who had once been invisible to the world. How he had saved a life and, in doing so, had found his own. Malik had won his battle that day. But in the end, he had rewritten his entire future. He wasn't defined by his circumstances anymore. He wasn't just a homeless boy struggling to survive. He was a young man with dreams, with purpose, and with the determination to make those dreams come true. For Malik, the journey was just beginning. He had so much ahead of him, so many possibilities, so many opportunities. But one thing was for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone or anything hold him back. The battle for his future had been hard, but he had already won the most important part. He had found himself. Would you have done what Malik did? Comment below. Like and share if you believe in second chances.